On the night she expected love and peace from her family, they planted a betrayal so deep it threatened to crush her soul forever. Evelyn, a 66-year-old widow, sat at the long wooden dining table that once echoed with laughter and meals shared with her husband Joseph. But now, only silence and suspicion filled the air. Her son's wife Ada looked her straight in the eye and declared with icy words, "With Joseph no longer here to protect you, pack your bags and never come back." Her son Samuel nodded in quiet agreement. The words pierced Evelyn's heart, sharper than any knife. Where are you watching from today? Kindly hit like, comment, and subscribe to this channel for more. Her eyes shifted to Joseph's empty chair, hoping against hope to see his warm smile and hear his calming voice. Instead, there was only a void that deepened her grief. Just 7 days earlier, she had buried the man who was her companion for 34 years. Now, in her deepest moment of sorrow, her own blood and his wife were treating her as if she no longer belonged. Ada's tone grew colder, her words rolling out with calculated cruelty. "This house was never yours, Evelyn. Joseph built it, and now it belongs to Samuel. You've only been living here by his grace. It's time you leave." Samuel, who once clung to his mother during storms, avoided her eyes. Evelyn sat frozen, her heart trembling at this betrayal. The walls that once sheltered her family memories seemed to close in around her. 34 years of love and sacrifice were being dismissed as though she had been nothing but a guest. Fighting back tears, Evelyn tried to reason. "This is the home where Samuel grew up. Every corner carries our story. Joseph and I worked for decades to make this house a place of love and stability." But Ada smirked, her voice sharp. "Memories cannot pay for repairs, bills, or property taxes, Mama. Be practical. It's time you find somewhere else. Maybe a senior home where you can play games with people your age." Samuel finally looked up and added quietly, "Ada is right, Mom. You won't be able to handle this place alone." The words struck Evelyn harder than any physical blow. The child she had nurtured through sickness and raised with love now stood united against her. "2 weeks should be enough for you to move out," Ada said coldly, as though dismissing a stranger. Evelyn rose slowly, her legs weak under the weight of shock. She walked upstairs to the bedroom she once shared with Joseph. The faint scent of his cologne still lingered in the air, wrapping around her heart. Sitting on the bed, she felt her entire world collapsing beneath her. Evelyn sat in silence, staring at the mirror across the room. The reflection that stared back looked older than 66, her silver hair falling loosely, her eyes heavy with pain. 2 weeks. That was all they had given her to dismantle a lifetime. Yet beneath the crushing weight of grief, something else began to stir, resolve. Joseph had always been careful with money. He had taught her to look closely at details even when he carried the bigger burden. If Samuel and Ada thought she would leave helpless, perhaps they were mistaken. The next morning, Evelyn brewed a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table alone. The house seemed to hold its breath, as though it knew change was coming. For 10 days, Ada and Samuel had walked through her home, whispering about renovations and plans, speaking of her presence as though she was invisible. Evelyn clutched her teacup and whispered to herself, "I must know what Joseph left behind." She decided her first step would be to visit Citibank, the place where Joseph had always handled their finances. Citibank stood tall at the corner of Main Street, a building Evelyn had passed countless times over the years. But she had rarely stepped inside because Joseph had always said, "Don't worry, my dear, I'll handle it." Now she had no choice. The bank manager, Mrs. Okafor, welcomed her with warm eyes full of sympathy. "Evelyn, I was so sorry to hear about Joseph. He was a true gentleman." Evelyn nodded softly, then confessed, "I need to understand my financial situation. Joseph managed everything, and I don't know where to start." Mrs. Okafor typed into her computer, her brows raising in surprise. "You and Joseph shared a checking account with enough to keep you steady for several months." Evelyn sighed in relief. "But that's not all," the manager continued. "There's also a savings account in both your names, substantial enough to care for you for years if used wisely. Tears filled Evelyn's eyes as relief washed over her. Yet Mrs. Okafor's voice carried more surprise as she added, I also see accounts in your name only. And a trust fund set up in 2015. Evelyn leaned forward, her heart racing. A trust fund. Joseph never mentioned that to me. Mrs. Okafor slid the papers across the desk. Yes, and it has received steady deposits over the years. Quite significant ones. Your husband may have been protecting you in ways you didn't know. Evelyn's hands trembled as she stared at the figures. While Samuel and Ada schemed to push her out, Joseph had quietly built a shield around her. The grief in her chest shifted slightly, replaced with a new feeling, strength. She whispered, Joseph, you prepared me. Evelyn left Citibank with documents tucked tightly in her purse. She drove past familiar streets in silence, her mind swirling. Samuel and Ada had been so certain, already speaking with realtors as though the house was theirs. Yet here she was, holding proof that Joseph had planned carefully. At a small cafe, she spread the papers across the table. The trust account revealed steady transfers, each one larger after times when Samuel had begged his father for help. Joseph had been generous, but he had also been quietly protecting Evelyn. That evening, Samuel's text arrived like a cruel reminder of their betrayal. Mom, Ada has found a realtor. We'll start showing the house next week. Hope you're packing. Evelyn stared at the message, then looked back at Joseph's financial papers. A new strength rose inside her. She whispered, They have no idea what you left behind, Joseph. No idea at all. Instead of replying, she folded the papers neatly and placed them in Joseph's old study. Tomorrow, she decided, she would find out more about the trust and where the money came from. The next morning, Evelyn visited Morrison and Partners, a small accounting firm Joseph had once mentioned in passing. Margaret, a kind woman in her late 60s with silver hair tied neatly back, welcomed her warmly. I was Joseph's accountant for nearly 15 years, she explained. He was honest and careful. What can I help you with? Evelyn placed the bank statements on the desk. The bank said this trust has been receiving deposits for years. But my son told me the family business was sold long ago. I don't understand. Margaret frowned and pulled up her records. Sold? No, Evelyn, Henderson Builders was never sold. Joseph restructured it in 2015. The assets were placed into a trust, your trust. That company is still alive and earning well. Evelyn gasped, her hand clutching her chest. You mean, the business is mine? Margaret nodded gently. Yes, the trust owns it, and you are the sole beneficiary. Joseph structured everything so that you would remain safe. And let me add, under the management of Tom, the foreman, the company has been flourishing. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. But Joseph told us the business barely survived. Margaret leaned closer, lowering her voice. That's because your son, Samuel, has been borrowing heavily from the company over the years. Joseph documented every loan as business transactions, not gifts. As of last month, Samuel owed the business nearly $95,000. Evelyn's hands trembled as she opened the file Margaret handed her. Loan agreements, all signed by Joseph and Samuel, lined the folder. Her heart broke. Her son, the boy she raised, had been living off his father's sacrifice. Evelyn whispered, Has Samuel paid anything back? Margaret shook her head. Not a cent. He assumed his father would forgive the debts. But now, Evelyn, you own those debts. The law is on your side. Evelyn sat back, stunned. Her son and Ada had been planning to throw her out of her home while Samuel carried nearly $95,000 in unpaid loans. It was betrayal upon betrayal. Margaret added, If you choose, you can demand repayment, restructure the terms, or even take legal action. The choice is yours. Evelyn nodded slowly. That night, Evelyn sat in Joseph's study, surrounded by files and contracts. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of control shifting into her hands. Samuel and Ada thought she was powerless, But Joseph had built a fortress around her. As she flipped through the papers, she found another surprise. The deed to a small seaside cottage purchased in her trust's name. Written in Joseph's handwriting was a note. For Evelyn's rest, when she is ready for ocean air and freedom. Tears streamed down her cheeks. The next morning, Evelyn invited Tom Bradley, the loyal foreman, to her home. Tom, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s, sat across the kitchen table, his rough hands holding a coffee cup. "Mrs. Evelyn," he said gently, "I've been worried since Joseph passed. Samuel came to the site last week asking about contracts and equipment. He claimed he was taking over. But Joseph told me years ago to only follow instructions from the trust's legal owner." Evelyn nodded and slid the documents toward him. "Tom, I am that owner." Tom studied the papers, his eyes widening. "So it's true. Joseph trusted you, not Samuel. That explains everything. Mrs. Evelyn, the company is doing well. We've been steady, taking reliable jobs, and the profits are strong. But Samuel has been trying to get his hands on the business for years. If you let me keep managing operations, I'll make sure you're secure." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Joseph believed in you, Tom. So do I. Continue running it as you have, but from now on, everything comes through me, not Samuel." Later that afternoon, Samuel barged into Evelyn's kitchen. His face flushed with anger. "Mom, what are you telling Tom? He says he won't give me access to the company accounts without proper documents. I'm your son. I should be in charge now." Evelyn sat calmly at the table, Joseph's files neatly stacked beside her. "Your father was always clear about one thing, Samuel. Business must follow proper procedures. If you want authority, show me the documents." Samuel's jaw tightened. For the first time, he realized his mother was not as powerless as he believed. Samuel's eyes burned with frustration. "Mom, stop this nonsense. Everyone knows Dad left everything to me. You can't just claim authority because of a few papers." Evelyn folded her hands, her calmness unsettling him. "These are not just papers, Samuel. They are trust documents, properly signed and sealed years ago. Your father planned this." Samuel laughed bitterly. "Planned? You mean he didn't trust his own son?" Evelyn's voice broke slightly but remained steady. "He trusted you, Samuel, but he also saw how easily you were influenced by Ada's demands." As if summoned, Ada entered minutes later, her heels striking the floor like gongs of war. She carried herself with confidence, her purse slung on her arm as if she were arriving for a negotiation. "Evelyn," she began coldly, "enough of this game. Samuel is Joseph's son. That makes him the rightful heir. Hand over the documents, or we'll take you to court." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Court? That would be interesting. Because in court, debts are also examined." Ada froze, then turned quickly to Samuel. "What debts is she talking about?" Samuel shifted uncomfortably, his face betraying guilt. "It's nothing, Ada. Just small loans Dad helped me with." Evelyn pulled out a thick folder, placing it on the table. "Small. These are signed loan agreements. $95,000 in total, borrowed from Joseph's company. My company now. Not a cent repaid." Ada snatched the documents, scanning them with trembling hands. Her face turned pale. "Samuel, you told me these were gifts." Evelyn's voice was firm. "They were never gifts. They were debts, and now they belong to me." Ada's composure cracked. "This can't be true. Joseph would never do this." Evelyn's eyes glistened with both pain and pride. "Joseph loved you, Samuel. But he loved me enough to protect me. He saw the way you were living, the money wasted, the excuses repeated. He chose to build a shield so that I would never be thrown aside." Samuel's voice rose, desperate. "But Mom, you can't run a company. You don't understand contracts, construction, or finance." Evelyn's lips curved into the faintest smile. "That's why Tom manages it, and he answers to me." The room grew heavy with silence. Samuel sank into a chair, staring at the documents as if they were foreign letters. Ada, however, wasn't finished. Even if this business is yours, the house still belongs to Samuel. We're already preparing to list it for sale. The realtor is coming next week. Evelyn leaned back, her eyes calm but piercing. Is that so? Then perhaps you should see these papers. She pulled another envelope from Joseph's study, handing it across the table. The house has been mortgaged, 18 months ago. Ada's mouth fell open. Mortgaged? For what? Evelyn's tone carried quiet triumph. For $350,000. Every cent placed into the trust account Joseph created. He knew what he was doing. Samuel leapt to his feet. That's impossible. Dad told me the house was paid off years ago. Evelyn shook her head slowly. It was. Until Joseph realized he needed to strengthen the trust. That house is no longer an inheritance waiting for you. It is collateral for my future. And I will not be moved from it. Samuel paced like a caged animal, his fists clenched. This isn't fair. After everything I've done for this family. Evelyn rose to her feet, her voice suddenly sharp. What have you done, Samuel? You borrowed, you wasted, you deceived. Joseph and I built everything from the ground up while you chipped away at it with your greed. And Ada, she turned to her son's wife. You fueled his appetite, convincing him that he deserved more than he earned. Ada's face flushed with fury, but she had no words left to defend herself. For the first time, Evelyn felt strength coursing through her veins. She was no longer the grieving widow at their mercy. She was the matriarch, the rightful owner of Joseph's legacy. If you want to contest this, you may, she said calmly. But know this, the law is on my side. The documents are sound. The debts are valid. And Joseph planned it all long before his death. Samuel's shoulders slumped, the fight draining from him. Ada glared, but even she knew they were trapped in a net Joseph had carefully woven. That night, Evelyn sat alone in her bedroom, staring at Joseph's old reading glasses on the nightstand. She whispered into the quiet. You knew this day would come, didn't you, Joseph? You saw what I refused to see. And you built a way for me to survive. Though her heart ached for the son she once knew, she also felt an unshakable peace. Joseph had loved her enough to shield her from betrayal. And for the first time since his death, Evelyn felt something more than grief. She felt gratitude. The next morning, Evelyn walked into the kitchen with a new firmness in her step. Samuel sat sulking at the table while Ada scrolled furiously on her phone. I've made my decision, Evelyn said. This house is not for sale. Henderson Builders will remain under Tom's management. And the debt Samuel owes will be repaid in full. Samuel looked up in shock. Mom, you wouldn't do that to me. Evelyn's voice was steady, her gaze unflinching. I didn't do this to you, Samuel. You did this to yourself. The days that followed were tense. Samuel and Ada left in silence, but Evelyn knew they would not surrender easily. True enough, within a week she received a letter from a lawyer hired by Ada's cousin, claiming Samuel was the rightful heir. Evelyn smiled faintly as she handed the letter to her attorney, Mr. Okeke. They forget, she said, that Joseph planned every detail. Mr. Okeke reviewed the trust, mortgage, and loan documents. His verdict was firm. Evelyn, they have no case. The law is entirely on your side. In court 2 weeks later, Ada strutted in confidently, dressed as though she already owned victory. Samuel followed quietly, his eyes heavy with guilt. Evelyn sat with grace beside her lawyer, clutching Joseph's old handkerchief in her palm. The judge listened as Ada's lawyer argued about family inheritance and moral obligations. But when Evelyn's documents were presented, trust agreements, loan contracts, mortgage receipts, the room shifted. The judge leaned forward. Mrs. Evelyn is the sole beneficiary of Henderson Builders and legal owner of the house. This case is dismissed. Ada's face turned red with fury. She hissed at Samuel. You promised me everything. But Samuel only lowered his head, unable to meet her glare. Evelyn left the courtroom with quiet dignity, her steps slow but strong. For the first time, she felt Joseph's presence beside her, as though he was whispering, "You were never alone." Outside the courthouse, the wind carried a coolness that brushed her cheek, and Evelyn knew this battle was won, not through revenge but through wisdom, planning, and the love Joseph had left behind. Weeks passed, and Samuel was forced to sign repayment terms for his $95,000 debt. The company's profits, carefully managed by Tom, ensured Evelyn had more than enough to live comfortably. Samuel took a second job to meet his obligations, his pride finally broken. Ada, bitter and restless, left for a time to stay with her relatives, unable to bear the shame. Evelyn watched from afar, her heart torn between sorrow and relief. She had lost her son to greed, but she had gained something else: her independence, her freedom, her voice. One evening, Tom visited with new contracts for Henderson Builders. "We're expanding, Mrs. Evelyn," he said proudly. Joseph would be smiling right now. Evelyn's eyes softened. "No, Tom. Joseph is smiling." She signed the papers with a steady hand, her signature no longer trembling with fear. The company thrived, the debt repayments arrived monthly, and Evelyn discovered a new rhythm in her days. She tended her garden, read by the window, and began writing letters to women's groups, determined to share her story so others would learn to protect themselves. 6 months later, Evelyn bought a cottage by the sea using funds from the trust Joseph had left. The house was small but beautiful, with wide windows facing the endless horizon. She furnished it simply, filling it only with things that brought her joy. Each morning she rose with the sound of waves, breathing deeply of the salt air. For the first time in her 66 years, Evelyn lived in a home that was entirely hers, free from judgment, free from greed, free from betrayal. Her heart, though scarred, had healed. Samuel visited once, unannounced, standing awkwardly at her cottage door. His eyes were tired, his clothes worn from long hours of work. "Mom," he said softly, "I know I failed you. I know I let Ada lead me into greed. But I want to change. I'll pay what I owe, every dollar. And maybe one day you'll forgive me." Evelyn listened quietly, her heart torn. She handed him a cup of tea and replied, "Forgiveness is not given in words, Samuel. It is proven in actions, day by day." That evening, Evelyn sat on her deck, staring at the horizon as the sun dipped into the ocean. She whispered to Joseph's memory, "He may yet learn, my love. But even if he doesn't, you gave me the strength to stand." The waves roared below, steady and timeless. Evelyn lifted her glass of water in a quiet toast. She was no longer the woman thrown aside by her own family. She was a woman who had survived betrayal, discovered hidden strength, and rebuilt her life on her own terms. The villagers in her coastal town soon began speaking of Evelyn's story as if it were a parable. Mothers told their daughters, "Know your rights, protect your future." Fathers reminded their sons, "Greed destroys faster than poverty." Even women in nearby towns invited Evelyn to speak, eager to hear how she turned sorrow into wisdom. Evelyn shared not with bitterness, but with warmth. "Family should be love, not chains," she told them. "Never let anyone reduce your worth. Even in grief, remember, you carry more strength than you think." And so, Evelyn's story became a living folktale, told at gatherings, whispered at markets, repeated on radios. The widow who was betrayed by her son's wife yet rose above it all. The woman who discovered her husband's secret shield and stood her ground against greed. In the end, Evelyn lived not as a victim, but as a victor. She found peace by the sea, dignity in her independence, and strength in her wisdom. And whenever she watched the sun set, she knew Joseph's final gift was not money, but freedom.